this section is about habits. And we were just talking about creating sustainable change. And I was saying how habits are really at the very core of this sustainable change. And that's why I'm so happy to introduce you to the following few videos, which are not my own videos, but the videos of a friend of mine, Bobric. He is a very renowned expert on how you can use habits to actually become happier. He has a brilliant book, and he also has a brilliant online course called Habits and Happiness. And from this online course, he was so kind to let me use a few of his lectures to give you an introduction of what habits can really do. And also, and that's what I think is the most exciting thing of all, he gave me a coupon code that you can use to actually get his course much cheaper. So please enjoy his videos. I think it's great, and you will really enjoy the course if you go for it. So there's nothing to hold us back, so let's start.
So what are habits? Habits are things we do automatically, thoughts we may have, or emotions, believe it or not. And all these things, emotion and thoughts, are performed automatically by our brain. So that leaves us with energy to do things that are important in our life, such as, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? What movie are you going to watch next week? And so on. So habits are performed automatically. Before we go any deeper into habits, I definitely want to mention William James, known as the father of American psychology. William James knew 100 years ago almost what we know today, and that is that habits, are performed automatically, they are ingrained in our brain, and more importantly, he talked about neuroplasticity back, 100 years ago. Now, what is neuroplasticity and what does that have to do with habits? Neuroplasticity is the science that basically proves that our brain changes every day. In the past, they were thinking it changes until we are maybe teenagers, 16, 18, 20. But now we know that our brain changes every single day until the day we die. But what happens is that it changes depending what we do. So everything that we do every single day affects our brain. And that is extremely important research and the knowledge to have, to know that everything you do every single day changes your brain. Just to share a little bit habit story with you, a couple of years ago, I really wasn't in a good shape. I wasn't feeling so good. I had some bad stomach ache. I had some heart problem. My feet was really hurting me. I really didn't know what was going on. So recently I went to the doctor, and basically he checked everything and said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because your health is just outstanding. I left the doctor's office and started thinking, what is it that I'm doing differently? I wasn't taking any medication, so I really, for the problems that I had, so I really didn't understand what is it. And then it kind of clicked in me. By changing my psychology, by studying what I've been studying for years, and implementing new habits, by changing my psychology, I changed my physiology. It's really incredible. And I know this can work for most of you, and this is not about just changing your physiology. Certainly it is about doing and achieving, becoming successful in anything and everything that you want to become successful. The habit loop. Let me explain what is the habit loop and why is that so important for us to understand. So as you see on the slide, so habit loop actually starts with the trigger. So anything that you do, habit that you have established or you're going to establish, starts with the trigger. So let's pick a habit that we all have, brushing our teeth, right? It starts with a trigger. Chances are, maybe it's first thing in the morning, as soon as you get up, you're going to go brush your teeth. Maybe it's after you have a coffee. Maybe it's before you go to work, after you watch TV, after you read the paper, whatever it is. But there is a certain time, think about it, that you brush your teeth. Something triggers it. So what's the next thing? Next thing is routine. What's routine in this case? Easily explainable. In this case is brushing your teeth. That is your routine. And then you get something, what's called reward. So your brain actually gets rewarded. In this case, you brush your teeth, that's your routine, right? And then your reward is you feel good, you smell good, you're just kind of ready to go, right? You feel really good, so that's your reward. And then so on. The next routine comes in, next trigger, routine, reward, and so on. That's the habit loop. But here's the problem. Your brain will give you a reward regardless if your habit is good for you or bad for you. Now, that is the problem because, let me give you an example. Let's say you just love big juicy hamburger. You go to the diner, you see it on a menu, you see almost everyone around you have it. And as soon as you see this picture, you just gonna order the hamburger, right? So that coming into the diner triggered it. You order your hamburger, your routine is now to eat and enjoy, and your reward is immediately, you just feel good. That was a great burger, right? I just really feel good. So your brain is really focused to give you the immediate pleasure, right? It is not focused on the long-term goal. It is not focused that this is not good for you in the long run if you have way too many, right? This may affect your health. So that's why you have to learn some tricks to trick your brain to focus on a long-term goal. We're going to cover some tools shortly. By now, you know how trigger is important. Understanding your trigger and what triggers your habit is extremely important. Well, every morning I do my gratitude habit, my gratitude exercise. So when I take a shower, I basically express my gratitude to the things, to my life, to, fingers that I have, to I can breathe, I can take a shower, anything, any little thing, but I express my gratitude loudly while I'm taking a shower. Well, what happened is I went on vacation and I realized for 2 days I haven't done my gratitude exercise. And I started analyzing to understand why this happened. While analyzing this habit, I realized that the trigger was missing. Here's what happened. When I go and take a shower, I look at my bright yellow ball in my at home, and that kind of triggers my gratitude exercise. When I went on a vacation, there was no yellow ball, so the trigger was missing. I realized then that I need to have not a specific trigger, not something that only happened while I'm home or in a certain situation, but rather to have a generic trigger. So since then, my trigger now is as soon as I turn on the shower, the water hits my body, that is my trigger. So now, regardless if I'm home, if I'm visiting somewhere, if I'm in another country, another planet, it really doesn't matter. As long and as soon as I take a shower and the water starts hitting my body, that triggers my gratitude habit. So think about the trigger, and if it's too specific, change it. Make it generic so that you don't skip your habit.
In this lecture, we will see how our thoughts and our beliefs shape our reality and what we can do about it. It is divided into 4 classes. In the first, we will talk about how science shows us that focusing more on what works and what is going well helps us to counter our inherent negativity bias. We'll see how placing more focus on the positive rather than the negative is not being detached from reality, but it's seeing reality from a more useful angle. And then we'll finish this first class by looking at the power of being grateful for what we have. In the second class, we look at self-fulfilling prophecies and optimistic mindsets. We will see how our beliefs about ourselves shape the way who we are and who we become. And in the third and fourth class, we will understand how we can go about changing these mindsets and how we can benefit from that. Take a look at this beautiful piece of art. This is Julian Beaver, who is an artist painting 3D paintings in the streets. It's a fascinating picture, and the camera captured it perfectly. But it looked at the painting from a particular perspective, and there are many other ways to look at it too. This, for example. From this perspective, it doesn't at all look like the beautiful drawing that we just saw. It looks distorted. In this case, our perspective determines how we see the world. What can be beautiful from one angle can be totally different from another. The same is true for the perspective we take on the events and situations in our lives. We usually look at situations and interpret what other people say or do according to our own set of past experiences, culture, faith, and values. All of those help us to form our beliefs about ourselves and about others and about the world in general. Our minds are constantly trying to make sense of our world, forming judgments and opinions about every situation, event, and interaction. It is as though we are looking at the world through distorted or colored lenses. And everyone has their own personal prescription or color of their glasses. It turns out that these glasses have a very powerful impact on our thoughts and our well-being. In fact, Ed Diener, who I already quoted before, one of the leading happiness researchers in the world, said that it appears that the way people perceive the world is much more important to happiness than objective circumstances. This quote sums up decades of research on happiness, and in essence it means that if we know a person's job, their marital status, and even the state of their bank account, we still only know very little about how happy he or she is. What we need to know is if a person is a benefit finder or a fault finder. That means if a person focuses more on the positive or on the negative. The benefit and the fault finder are two archetypes that have been introduced by Tal Ben-Shahar, who taught positive psychology at the University of Harvard a few years ago. And these two archetypes capture in many ways how we can create our reality, how our perspective creates our reality. Let's take a look at the first one, the fault finder. A fault finder always focuses on things that don't work, on problems and things that are not going well. Thoreau says that the fault finder will find faults even in paradise. The problem here is that we tend to take our perceptions of the world for the reality. And fault finders really believe that the unfavorable reality is out there, independent of what we think or feel. For a fault finder, no matter what they do, they always end up with a careless partner or a miserable job. No matter where they look, things always seem to go wrong for them. The typical example is looking at the glass as half empty. But there is also a way of looking at the glass as half full. And this is what the benefit finder does. The benefit finder focuses on the positive, focuses on what works. A benefit finder sees the things that are going well, and he sees the strengths of others rather than their weaknesses and their faults. A great example is Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years captured by an oppressive regime. And when he was asked, after he came out of prison, how he was able to come out of prison with such an open, loving heart, his response was that, he said, "It has been a great tragedy to spend the best years of my life in prison. But only because I was in prison for 27 years, I was able to transform myself and my thinking. Because prison gave me the time to sit down and think, and that's something that you usually do not have in our normal life. So even after 27 years in prison, he was able to look at the positive side of his being captured. And this is a perfect example for the difference between a benefit finder and the fault finder. In the resources, I added a link to a video about the oldest Holocaust survivor who is still alive. And this old lady exemplifies in a remarkable way what it means to be a benefit finder. I very strongly encourage you to take a look. It's really breathtaking. So to round up this distinction between the benefit and the fault finder, I want to once again stress that nobody is absolutely one extreme or the other. We all exist on the continuum. We are all somewhere along the line in between the two extremes. So what I advocate now is to move from fault finding more towards benefit finding, because it has a lot of benefits, and we'll see more about that soon. When it comes to benefit and fault finding, we humans have an inherent disadvantage that has been given to us by evolution. It is called the negativity bias. What this means is that we unconsciously seek out negative information and are also more affected by this negative information. We react more strongly to negative life events and negative feedback. We react more strongly to losing something than to gaining something. And this had evolutionary use for us. We had to be more alert towards dangers, because one mistake could mean our death. Today we still have this negativity bias. It's ingrained in us by evolution. The problem is that it has become maladaptive in today's world. Our life is hardly ever threatened anymore, but still we are often rewarded for noticing the problems that need solving and the stresses that need to be managed. Sometimes this can indeed be very useful, but the problem is that we get stuck in this pattern. We build habits of focusing on the negative. We build habits of focusing on faults rather than benefits. And there's also neurological evidence for that. One area of the brain used for the negativity bias is the amygdala. It is these two almond-shaped areas of the brain, and this is a specific area that uses about 2/3 of its neurons searching for negative experiences, for negative information in our environment. And even more important, the amygdala is the most important brain area when it comes to negative emotions. And it's a really powerful brain area, and it impacts lots of what we do and lots of what we remember. One example for the negativity bias in our amygdala is that negative events and experiences get stored in memory almost immediately. On the other side, positive experiences have to be held in awareness for more than 12 seconds in order to transfer from short-term to long-term memory. With all the information we just heard about benefit and fault finding and negativity bias, the question becomes that is benefit finding about being detached from reality? Is it about wishful thinking and dreaming? And the answer is no, that it's actually the fault finder who is detached, because the fault finder misses out on most of the good things, and most on the things around him that are working well. Stavros and Torres phrase it like this: we see what we look for, and we miss much of what we are not looking for, even though it is there. Our experience of the world is heavily influenced by where we place our attention. And even more, being a constant fault finder comes with great costs. Fault finders are less creative, are more prone to depression, and have higher stress levels. Maybe even more importantly, they are considerably less happy than their benefit-finding peers. The issue also is that some of us have to become fault finders due to our jobs. Lawyers and tax auditors, for example, are trained throughout their lives to look for errors and flaws in others' arguments. That's invaluable for them to do a good job, but it comes with very high costs. Lawyers are among the professions most prone to depression, even though their income and status is high. Their professional habit of fault-finding spreads to their private lives as well. Their brains get stuck in negative patterns, always on the lookout for flaws and errors. The reason is that our brain gets better and better at what we repeatedly do. Think back to when we talked about neuroplasticity, and we talked about the water that shapes its pathways. Our brain does not differentiate between pathways used at work and pathways used in our private life. It's the same pathways, it's the same brain. So if in one part of our lives we are needed to look at negative things, this also permeates the rest of our lives because we use the same pathways. For people in this position, it's even more important to retrain their brain because they're even more prone to the negative effects of being a fault finder. I want to finish off with one caveat that's very important here. Benefit finding is not about ignoring the problems that exist. Rather, it is about both the good sides and the opportunities, as well as the problems and the threats. We need to see both, but we also need to be aware that we are inherently biased towards placing more attention on the negative. And in order to account for this negativity bias and to see reality as it really is and not the distorted version of it, we need to train ourselves to become more of a benefit finder. And this is what we're going to do now. As we saw when we talked about change in neuroplasticity, we are able to rewire our brain by doing continuous exercises to, over time, build new pathways, new connections in our brain, and become more of a benefit finder. As Martin Seligman, one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, put it, habits of thinking need not be forever. One of the most significant findings in psychology in the last 20 years is that individuals can choose the way they think. One such proven exercise is what is called the 3 good things exercise. It requires us to make it a habit to sit down maybe on Sundays and write down 3 good things that happened through the week. Or maybe even 3 times a week, sit down in the evening and think about what happened throughout the day that was good, that was positive. Or you sit down in the evening with your partner and your family during dinner and tell each other about 3 good things that have happened throughout the day. It doesn't really matter when and how you do it, as long as you do it regularly. I encourage you to use the personal reflection journal for these exercises. But as always, if we want to create lasting change, we have to take consistent action. Make it a habit. Another way to become more of a benefit finder and more happy in general is to bring more gratitude to our lives. Remember when we talked about the myths of happiness? We also talked about the hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill, the phenomenon that occurs because we always adapt to the circumstances we are currently in and then always set higher goals and want more. One way to step off this hedonic treadmill is to start appreciating what you already have, because it's so easy for us to overlook. It may seem very simple, but it can be very powerful, and it has been proven to be very powerful in numerous research studies. Simple acts of gratitude don't cost you much, especially once you get over the initial discomfort some of us feel when we thank others. But they can make a huge difference. There's a lot of convincing research on the power of gratitude, and especially on the positive effects of keeping a regular gratitude journal. A researcher called Ammons points to his research and also the research of others that shows that translating thoughts into concrete language, doesn't matter if you
say it or write it, has advantages over simply thinking. It makes us more aware of them and deepens their emotional impact. And that's why writing in a journal can be so much more powerful than simply thinking about something. So what I encourage you is to make it a regular practice to write down what you're grateful for. Keeping this journal is about getting ourselves to pay attention to all the good things in our lives, to all the good things that we usually take for granted. If you decide to write a gratitude journal, here are 5 tips that have shown to make writing this gratitude journal and gratitude in general more effective. The first one is to go for detail. It's better to look at 1, 2, or 3 things in particular and elaborate on them in detail than writing a superficial list of many things. The second tip is get personal. Focus on the people to whom you're grateful for, rather than only for the things for which you're grateful for. Another very effective way to stimulate gratitude is to reflect on your life and how it would be different without certain things, without certain blessings. For example, what if I didn't have my loving wife or husband? Or what if I didn't have this comfortable bed? The fourth one is to try and record events that were unexpected and surprising, because these elicit stronger feelings of gratitude. And the fifth one, I already mentioned before, is don't overdo it. Writing occasionally has been shown to be beneficial, but writing every day makes us adapt to gratitude. So we are also able to adapt to gratitude, so that's why we don't want to overdo it. Do it once a week, maybe twice a week, and see how it fits into your life and how you like it. Of course, there is no right way to do it, and you don't need to buy a fancy personal journal to record your entries, or worry about spelling or grammar. The important thing is to establish the habit of paying attention to gratitude-inspiring events. Another thing that you can try is to share your gratitude. This can be very powerful. When you're thankful for something that another person did for you, share your gratitude with them. Let them know what they did for you and that you're grateful for it, and maybe even why you appreciate it. You can write them an email or simply call them, or even do it in person. By sharing your gratitude, it's not only you who benefit from it, but also the people you're grateful for. It is a powerful way to also affect the people around you in a positive way. Let me round up this lecture. The essence of what we talked here is that our thoughts create our world. Where we place our attention on matters. We have the choice to place our attention on what is good or what is bad. And this, in turn, creates our reality. And we can break out of this. There are exercises that help us cultivate being more of a benefit finder, help us cultivate to look more on the bright side and not neglect it. This session is called Beliefs as Self-Fulfilling Prophecies and the Optimistic Mindset. In the last section, we looked at how our thoughts shape our subjective reality, our feelings, and how we can perceive the same thing from different perspectives. But our thoughts not only change our individual, subjective reality, but they can even change the objective reality. I will tell you how. Some decades ago, psychology regarded optimism with some suspicion. It was anxious that it could encourage a fool's paradise approach to life. The fear was that we humans wouldn't be equipped to face life's challenges and hardships if we lived with our heads in the clouds, deluding ourselves that life was a bed of roses. Early works considered optimism naivety or denial, and in the 1970s, optimism was even considered a psychological deficit. And then Robert Rosenthal came along. Robert Rosenthal became famous because of his landmark study in psychology. What he did was he went into random schools and had all the pupils take a test to find the students with the highest potential. Then he went ahead and told the teachers about the students who were most likely to make significant progress through this year. The actual test was a regular IQ test, and in reality, the high potential students were picked completely randomly. That means the outcome of this test was fake. The teachers were not allowed to tell the pupils or anybody else, and they were not given any additional instructions. After a year, the researchers went back to the school and looked how the students were doing. And what Robert Rosenthal found when he came back after this year were pretty much mind-blowing results. Those students who had been randomly labeled high potentials improved not only their grades, but also their IQ levels, even in the long term, and significantly more than their peers. IQ was up till then something that most people thought of as something that's fixed, something that we are born with. And they were able to improve it just because their teachers believed them to improve. And here's the explanation for this. The teachers' beliefs were self-fulfilling prophecies. Self-fulfilling prophecies are, in psychology, beliefs that come true because we are acting as if they are already true. If some of you have heard about the book The Secret, in this book, it's pretty famous, it's been called The Law of Attraction. And it's a book that's coming from the New Age movement, but there's really nothing mystical about it. Our expectation that we will see a particular outcome changes our behavior, which then shapes the way others see us. And in turn, others provide us with certain kind of feedback, and that reinforces our original belief then. And so on and so on. It's an upward spiral. And the same can be a downward spiral if it's a negative belief. If we believe somebody is incapable of improving or incapable of doing math. Here's how Robert Rosenthal explains the study mechanisms. He says that in a very short time, the teachers began to treat those allegedly high potentials differently than the other kids. Those kids began to think of themselves differently, and in the end, they actually performed better than the other kids. The children were transformed simply by the positive expectations of the teacher. And as I just said, unfortunately the same thing has also been proven true when teachers think of certain kids negatively. So how does this self-fulfilling prophecy apply to our lives? Let's say, for example, that I'm going to a party where I don't know many people. If I believe I don't make a good first impression, or I worry that nobody will talk to me, I will probably enter the party acting awkward, anxious, and kind of standoff. And then, people are likely to interact with me with less enthusiasm, or they may ignore me. And this then confirms my belief that I'm not good with people I don't know. On the other hand, if I enter the party believing that I'm good with people I don't know, and expecting to make new friends, then I'm much more likely to be outgoing, engaging, and if somebody in fact doesn't like me, I'm much more likely to not take it personally. As a result, people will likely respond amiable to my friendliness, and I indeed make new friends. So if you ask yourself if this is the power of positive thinking, then the answer is yes and no, because it's actually not that simple. The optimistic mindset is a thinking pattern that enables us to benefit from self-fulfilling prophecies. But there's a problem. It's called the Stockdale Paradox. Admiral Stockdale was a high-ranking American military who was caught and tortured during the Vietnam War. In the book Good to Great, James Collins talks to Stockdale and looks at his coping strategy and asks him about this period in his life. Here's what Admiral Stockdale said. He said, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect I would not trade. And then James Collins, the author of Good to Great, asked him, who didn't make it out of Vietnam? And Stockdale replied, oh, that's easy. The optimists. They were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And so on. And then, he said, they died of a broken heart. Stockdale then added that this is the very important lesson he learned. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And this is what Collins calls the Stockdale Paradox. Abraham Maslow, one of the main humanistic psychologists, said the same thing. He said that false optimism sooner or later means He said that false optimism sooner or later means disillusionment, anger, and hopelessness. It is important that our beliefs are grounded in reality, just as Maslow and Stockdale said. Clearly, blind optimism that's detached from reality, has to be avoided, and it's not beneficial. But practical optimism that's grounded in reality and its benefits are now widely established in psychology in general. The question then becomes, well, when should I use the optimistic mindset? And here's when. If you're in an achievement situation, use optimism, like getting a promotion or selling something, writing a difficult report, or winning a game. Secondly, if you're concerned about how you will feel in the future, use optimism. And thirdly, if you want to lead, if you want to inspire others, if you want people to vote for you, then use optimism. For the time when not to use optimism, there's a very easy rule of thumb, and that is, do not use an optimistic mindset when the cost of failure is high. The fundamental guideline for not deploying optimism is to ask whether the cost of failure is high in a particular situation. If the cost of failure is high, optimism is simply the wrong strategy. You do not want pilots in your plane to be optimistic that nothing's going to happen. We want them to be cautious. That's why we all get asked to turn off our phones on the plane, even though it's highly unlikely that there is any effect on the plane's instrument. We want them to be cautious, because here the cost of failure is high. It's death, or at least a catastrophe. Using techniques that minimize those costs is inappropriate. On the other hand, if the cost of failure is low, use optimism. The sales agent deciding whether to make one more call or not loses only his time when he fails. So, the more optimistic salesperson have to be found to way outperform their peers. Because this course is to be based on science, I also want to tell you why this works. Why it is that pessimists and optimists fare differently, and why optimism is better. How do self-fulfilling prophecies work? As we just saw, optimists believe that they can do it. It's about their belief, it's about their mindset. What you believe and what you expect to happen influences our future. The first explanation is that those people are more motivated. They have higher motivation. Ask yourself, in which situations are you more motivated? When you're confident or when you're less confident? Most certainly, your motivation is higher if you feel confident about succeeding. When you feel more confident, you set more challenging goals and you are higher motivated to reach those goals. It's very easy, but that's how it works. The second explanation is that optimists try harder. They are more persistent. They expect good things to happen, so they don't give up easily when they face setbacks. Remember what Admiral Stockdale said? He said to never lose faith that you will prevail in the end. And this faith that you will prevail in the end helps you look at failures and setbacks as a way of, this is just a temporary setback. This is just something to overcome. If I persist, in the end, I will succeed. I will make it. In the next part of the class, when we talk more about mindsets, you will see how the way we perceive failure and setbacks can have tremendous impact on our whole life. And the third reason why optimistic beliefs turn into reality is captured by self-perception theory. One of my favorite ideas is that people become what they do. Self-perception theory turns common wisdom on its head. Common wisdom says that people act the way they do because of their personality traits and their attitudes, right? They return a lost wallet because they are honest, and they recycle the trash because they care about the environment. But research supporting self-perception theory suggests that the reverse also holds true. If we return a lost wallet, we see ourselves returning it, and we see ourselves as honest people. That means if we track the recycling bin to the trash, we infer that we really care about the environment. We unconsciously look at our behavior to figure out who we are. This is one of my favorite ideas in psychology. It's the idea that people become what they do. They become what they do because they look at their behavior and think, ooh, I must be this kind of person. So somebody who recycles the trash, you look at yourself, you look at your behavior and think, I must be a person who cares about the environment. I must be an honest person because I just returned this wallet. Obviously, we hardly ever think these thoughts consciously. These are unconscious mechanisms. But that is also why they are so powerful. So for these three reasons, we are higher motivated, we are more persistent, and we learn about ourselves by looking at our behavior. This is how self-fulfilling prophecies and the optimistic beliefs that we hold become our reality. The last class in this series is changing our mindsets by changing our behavior. This is the ultimate strategy. It is important to understand how our mindset affects our behavior, and we discussed this extensively in the last lecture. But ultimately, we have to change our behavior to reap the benefits of self-fulfilling prophecies, the optimistic mindset, and the growth mindset. As we saw when we looked at self-perception theory, there is one main strategy to become a more successful person: changing our behavior. We have to put ourselves on the line and leave our famous comfort zone. The idea of the comfort zone goes back to one of the classic experiments in psychology. More than 100 years ago, in 1908, two psychologists discovered that when they had mice running in a maze and giving them mild electrical shocks, they were faster to complete the maze. But when the shocks became too strong, the rats just randomly ran into every direction trying to escape. The lesson learned from this experiment is that increasing stress and arousal could help focus motivation and attention on the task, but only up to a certain point. The same has been found true for humans. If we are in a state of relative comfort, we perform at a steady level. But in order to maximize our performance and grow, we need a state of relative anxiety, a space where our stress levels are slightly higher than normal. This space is called optimal anxiety, or growth zone, and it's just outside our comfort zone. Too much anxiety and we're too stressed to be productive, and our performance drops sharply. Let me give you an example. Back in the school, we used to be nervous before exams, but if we got too nervous, that would cause problems. An optimal level of nervousness and stress can help us focus on the test and remember the information that we studied better. But too much test anxiety can have us have a blackout and we don't remember anything. This would be the panic zone. Where we want to be is the growth zone. And when we are in the growth zone, we will see that over time we are expanding our comfort zone. And the goal is to reach that optimum level so that our skills increase and we become comfortable with this new level of anxiety. Then we're in the expanded comfort zone. You'll see that as you challenge yourself, your comfort zone adjusts and what was difficult before becomes more easier as you repeat it. And as we get more used to those feelings of, let's call it, productive discomfort, it won't be so scary to try new things in the future. Of course, there are things we can do that help us step out of our comfort zone. The first thing to remember is to take one step at a time. Start small. The change process doesn't happen in one step, but in many, many small steps. You do one thing different in the right direction, and that's what behaviorists call successive approximations. One step leads to another. With each step you take, you perceive yourself as someone who does go outside your comfort zone. Remember about self-perception theory. We learn about ourselves by looking at our behavior. So if we step outside of our comfort zone, we perceive ourselves as a person who steps outside of our comfort zone. And we infer, oh, I must be a person who does this kind of things. So when you move into your growth zone by trying something new and you don't, die, it's kind of reinforcing. It's reassuring. It's encouraging. It might even help you to get in your growth zone the next time, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. Here I also want to remind you of neuroplasticity. When we get outside of our comfort zone, we start creating new pathways in our brain. And those pathways or connections grow stronger only over time. As we continue to go outside our comfort zone, these pathways are reinforced and these connections grow. What else can we do to make leaving our comfort zone easier? One such help is finding a role model. Because one thing we know is that people don't attempt to achieve something unless they believe it can be done. We know that people are much more likely to attempt to do things if they've seen that someone like them can do it. First, we need to know that something can be done. And then we need to know that we can do it. And role models can help us with both of these points. They are the obvious proof that some things can be done. And when you then go and bring the right mindset to your life, then you are ready to grow beyond what you could have imagined before. Speaking of the right mindset, we also have to learn to fail. Please keep in mind there is no foolproof recipe for success. That doesn't exist. And failures and setbacks will inevitably occur if we really try and move out of our comfort zone. The key is to bring a growth mindset to these failures. Seeing failures as part of the learning process. Seeing failures as learning from them, as sources of information. We will take a closer look at how to learn to fail in the last section when we talk about dealing with the negatives. We will learn how to reframe failures and how to handle them effectively. And last but not least, if you really don't feel ready yet to go outside of your comfort zone, you can try to visualize it. Visualization can be a great tool. In psychology research, it's often called mental imagery, and it's used a lot in sports. It has been proven that people can improve performance through visualizing their actions, because action and imagination often activate the same parts of our brain. When we need to learn a new physical skill, mental practice of this skill can produce the same physical changes in our motor system as the physical practice. Your brain simply doesn't know the difference. For example, researchers looked at the brains of weightlifters. They found that the patterns in their brain that are activated when they lifted hundreds of pounds were almost the same patterns as when they only imagined it. Research showed that mental practices can be almost as effective as true physical exercise, and that doing both is more effective than doing either of them. A great study done in this area brought in two groups of people. One of the groups were instructed to go to the gym. They carried out real workouts in the gym, and the other group carried out virtual workouts in their heads. The researchers found that the group who went to the gym had 30% muscle increase, and the group of people who only imagined that they were doing weight training had muscle increase almost half as much, about 15%. And this remained like this for the next 3 months. So simply by imagining that you're doing weightlifting, your muscles grow. This form of mental rehearsal has been popular since the Soviets started using it back in the 1970s. They used it in sports. Nowadays, many athletes all across the world employ this technique, and almost every world-class athlete uses visualization. The brain is getting trained for actual performance during visualization. It has been found that regular mental practices can enhance motivation, increase our confidence and our persistence, and improve our performance. All these things are relevant for achieving our best life. And in order for you to do this, I want to introduce you to a practice called Best Possible Self. It's a writing exercise, and for this exercise, you need about 20 minutes a day for 4 days. But this is again flexible, and you can do it as you please. Think about your life in the future. Imagine that everything has gone as well as it possibly could. You have worked hard, and you succeeded at accomplishing all your life's goals. Think of this as the realization of all your life dreams. Think about all the aspects of your life, your home, work, relationships, leisure activities, etc., etc. Now, write about what you imagined. And before we end this lecture, I want to finish off with a final sentence. Remember that in the end, it always comes down to our actions. Visualization can be a helpful tool, but in the end, we have to take action. In this class, we look at how we can change mindsets by changing the beliefs about ourselves. Let's look at what different mindsets there are, what different mindsets people have, so that we then can go and change them. Let's first look at how we view intelligence. What do you think about this statement? Do you think it's true or not? You can learn new things, but you can't really change your basic intelligence. Again, do you think this is true, or do you think this is actually something that's not true and intelligence can be changed? If you think intelligence is fixed, then it most certainly is. It will be fixed for you. But if you think that intelligence is in fact something that you can change and that you can build up by putting effort in it and studying and learning, then you are able to increase your intelligence. This is just another version of the self-fulfilling prophecy we talked in the last class. But also, this points us towards the two different mindsets that we can have towards intelligence. One is a fixed mindset, and the other one is a growth mindset. We will take a closer look at this in turn, but let's finish off this example first. I want to prove to you that in fact, intelligence is malleable. And for this I'll share with you a quote by Alfred Binet. He is the inventor of the IQ test. He said back then in the 1920s, when he invented the IQ test, that a few modern philosophers assert that an individual's intelligence is a fixed quantity, a quantity which cannot be increased. We must protest and react against this brutal pessimism. And then he continues, with practice, training, and above all, method, we manage to increase our attention, our memory, our judgment, and literally to become more intelligent than we were before. In fact, the whole IQ test was invented to identify those kids who were currently not benefiting from the school system and help them become better. Or let's take another look at something that most of us think of as something that's given to us by birth that we either can or cannot do. Drawing. Some people seem to naturally draw well, others seem to draw poorly. So what about drawing skills? Can you draw? Do you think you could ever draw like this? As it turns out, drawing is not a magical ability that only very few of us have, and that is given to us by birth. Take a look at these examples. These before and after drawings were drawn by the same person only 5 days later. They went through a drawing course of 5 days, and that's the difference. Here, another version. Just think about this for a second. Drawing, something that people usually think is something that we either can do or cannot do, is so changeable with only 5 days of drawing training. This is the difference that it makes. That's incredible. But it's not only me and science who say that, but also one of the most famous painters of all time, Vincent van Gogh. He said, if you hear a voice within you say, you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and the voice will be silenced. He already knew what psychologists had to find out 100 years later. These two examples, intelligence and our artistic ability, lead us to an overall understanding of that there are two different mindsets to look at things. You can easily replace intelligence or artistic ability by musicality, creativity, the athletic type, or maybe some business understanding, some intuition. All these things can be looked at from two different angles, with a fixed or with a growth mindset. These two mindsets are underlying belief that we have about our qualities and even about our personalities. Let's look at the fixed mindset first. If you have a fixed mindset towards something, you believe that the qualities you have are carved in stone. Success is not about learning, but about showing talent. What you do is about winning, and not about developing and learning. People with growth mindset, on the other side, see their qualities as things that they can develop through much dedication and through effort. They believe that with experience, effort, and engagement, people can grow. The underlying understanding is that we all differ in talents, but these talents can be developed, no matter how much initial talent you have. People with a fixed mindset tend to think, I'm not athletic, I'm not good at maths, or I just can't lose weight. If you have a growth mindset, on the other hand, you think thoughts like this. If I don't try, I fail automatically. Or if you just experience the setback, you think, I'll have to work a little bit harder next time. And the reaction towards failure is, what can I learn from this mistake? Now here's why mindset matters. Our mindsets matter because they affect how we think of effort and how we respond to failure. When we are faced with failure or a challenge, people with a fixed mindset do not pay attention to learning information. They get depressed more easily. They underrepresent past successes and focus on their failures. Most importantly, they look at effort as a reflection of low talent. That means that if you have a fixed mindset, hard work means I don't get it, I'm unintelligent, I'm not natural at this. Effort means that we lack the ability, that we lack the talent. If you have a growth mindset, however, you have an understanding that it is the effort that makes success come. It is trying harder when we face a setback. And because we try harder, that's why we overcome difficulties. If you have a growth mindset, you see effort as a necessary part of success. And we have seen these ways of thinking with all kinds of geniuses all over history. It has actually been shown that the defining characteristic of geniuses is that they're persistent and put in extreme amounts of effort. People who are geniuses, or people who simply have a growth mindset, understand that it's all about learning and becoming better. Failure means we have to try new things. Failure means we have to put in more effort. So whereas the fixed mindset holds you back, the growth mindset propels you forward. Again, we can see how our own mindsets become self-fulfilling prophecies. And because it makes such a huge difference, I invite you to take this time out here with me. Take this time out and identify an area in your life where you have a fixed mindset. Where does it usually occur? And has it served you well? You can find more in the resources, but pause here and think about it for a second.